Wonderful. Well, in case you haven't worked it out, our new series is called Reconnecting. And usually what we would do on a Sunday like this, I know some people, it's the first time you've been around and we have a Vision Sunday, but often we would have a Vision Sunday and we'd talk about everything that we want to kind of push into the year ahead, the things we think God's calling us to. And then next week we'd follow that up with a Giving Sunday, a chance to resource some of that vision. But we are going to do it slightly differently, and we're going to just talk about it over a month. And the reason for that, or there's different reasons for that, but one of the main reasons, I don't know about you, but as we've kind of had the last 12 months, whatever that was, and as we're beginning to think about reconnecting on all kinds of levels, it feels to me a little bit, and it might just be me in this, but I remember when I was learning to drive, and my dad very generously, most of the time very patiently, would take me out and let me kind of get my foot down and practice driving as you do. And there was one little road that goes, it's in the Peak District, it comes out of Sheffield, and a big round sweeping corner that drops down into the village of Hathersage. And it's a great road just to get up through the gears. And I remember there was one time, and I'd got a little bit cocky really. I was coasting, hadn't done my test yet, but I thought, I'm going to nail this. I actually failed my first test for dangerous driving and the examiner having to take physical control of the vehicle, but I didn't know that was going to happen at this time. And we're driving along, third, up into fourth, and then fifth. We could crack fifth. And you know that thing where like fifth and reverse are kind of in the same place, but on different sides? That one. And as I went to go into fifth, there was this amazing sort of crunch and the gears didn't quite take, and actually, because I was trying to put it into reverse, and my dad, who had been patient up to that point, might not have been quite so patient in the moment, but the point is, sometimes, and at the moment, it feels like as we're trying to reconnect, re-energize, look to the things of the future, dealing with the past 12 months, it's like, I kind of want to gear up, and yet somehow it doesn't quite feel like it's going mentally, emotionally, maybe spiritually, maybe just in some of the practical things we're able to not do at the moment. And so I just wanted us to take a little bit of time over the next couple of months before we kind of gear up and get our foot down and go into the things that I believe God has for us and the things I'm excited about as we push into over the next year, as we look again at sort of moving upstairs to phase 2, pushing out through love your neighbor, connecting again with our city. I think it's just right that before we move into all that actually we start the Vision series around this word, reconnection. Reconnection. That's what Psalm 23 that we heard read, amongst other things, is about. It's full of reconnecting, of connection with God through different circumstances in different situations. And so this morning, that's what I want to invite each one of us to do. You know, this thing here it's great, but it's a piece of plastic and glass, a very expensive piece of plastic and glass. If I just let the battery run out, if it's not connected to anything ever, it just becomes an overpriced piece of plastic. What gives this is kind of power and its usefulness and its ability to do all the amazing stuff it can do is that reconnecting into power. I'm just ringing Vicky because I've just tapped it 3 times on the back. Hi, love. You're right. I just thought we could have a moment of connection. I'm not usually into public displays of affection, but let's go with it. Anyway, sorry about that. Where was I? Reconnecting. We need to constantly make sure we're connecting. We can only go for so long without reconnecting again. And the danger is we kind of launch into recovery without reconnecting, that we kind of seek to help the city recover, people we know recover, those who are really struggling this time recover without first reconnecting. Some of you would have seen a few weeks ago, Rachel, I hope she doesn't mind me saying this, I'm sure she won't, but Rachel, who was brilliantly, she's been playing a part, as many of you have, through COVID, and she was here at the front filming actions, and the most observant among you would have noticed that there's a moment where she disappears out the bottom left of the screen. That isn't some new move. She's not been practicing this kind of new dance or anything. She actually managed to snap her Achilles by doing actions. Far too enthusiastic, clearly, but that's the kind of praise we love. But she snapped her Achilles, and she texted me just yesterday. So this theme of reconnection and recovery, but reconnection, it really relates to her at the moment. Because the point is that she can't recover, she can't learn to walk again until actually she'd had that operation that kind of reconnects the two bits of the Achilles tendon. Without the reconnection, the recovery, as much as she tried, is never going to happen. And in fact, there's a danger of her doing more damage. And so it's really important at the start of meeting back together, of reconnecting with our society, with those around us, and the start of reconnecting with that thing that God wants to do in us, that we start by making sure we're connecting with God. And I just want to read Psalm 81 to you, because this is, I think, a word for us. It's written by a guy called Asaph, who was David's director of music, and he was a prophet. And he's looking at the situation around him in Israel, and he's saying, the people are lamenting. They're disconnected from some of the purposes and plans of God. And so I want to challenge you, Israel, challenge you as God's people to reconnect again. It says this: sing for joy to God our strength, shout aloud to the God of Jacob. Begin the music, strike the tambourine, play the melodious harp and lyre, sound the ram's horn at the new moon, and when the moon is full on the day of our feast. This is a decree for Israel. Now, I'm not going to talk about that this morning. If you want to do those things in your own private time later today, feel free to do that. But this is the bit I really want to talk about. He says, or in another version it says, an unknown voice said to me, I removed the burden from your shoulders. Your hands were set free from the basket. In your distress you called, and I rescued you. I answered you out of a thundercloud. I tested you at the waters of Meribah. He's looking back to the days of the Exodus when God set his people free. He's saying, there was a time, remember, when you were connected to God. There was a time when you were connected to him. He goes on, hear, O my people, I will warn you. If you would but listen to me, O Israel, you shall have no foreign god among you. You shall not bow down to an alien god. I am the Lord your God who brought you up out of Egypt. Open wide your mouth, and I will fill it. But my people would not listen to me. Israel would not submit to me. So I gave them over to their stubborn hearts to follow their own devices. You see, the history of Israel was that although they looked like the people of God, although they kind of looked back to the moves of God, although they kind of, to all intents and purposes, kind of had this pattern, this kind of rhythm of trying to connect with God, the reality was it looked like connection with God, but it was only sort of intermittently, and they kind of went through all the motions, and they kind of tried to follow God, but it was only rare sometimes that they really connected with God. And you see that it's so much easier when we just connect with God. It's so much easier, and it makes a noise. It has an impact. But the people had forgotten that deep, deep connection with God. But it says, if my people would listen to me, if Israel would follow my ways, how quickly would I subdue their enemies? And turn my hand against their foes. Those who hate the Lord would cringe before him, and their punishment would last forever. But you would be fed with the finest of wheat, with honey from the rock. I would satisfy you. Now, apart from being a celiac's worst nightmare that he would fill you with the finest of wheat, there's a real promise there that God is so easy. If only you turned to me, if only you connected with me, I would fill you. It's so simple. We make it so complicated and so hard, somehow not quite getting the connection. But God wants to say it's so easy. And he says earlier on, an unknown voice calls. Well, why is it an unknown voice? Because Israel were God's people, and yet they're disconnected. And so an unknown voice, God is still calling. I don't know for you whether you're disconnected from God. Maybe you've never felt a connection to him. Maybe it's just the last year's taken it out of you. Maybe that's just a pattern that you never really get that deep connection. Maybe God feels unknown, but God still is calling you to connect. That voice, that invitation for connection is always and constantly there. And all we need to do is respond, and then we'll be fed with the finest of wheat and with honey from the rock. But he says in there, you shall have no foreign god among you. You see, I love this game. It's a very simple game of catch. But in order for this ball to connect with this paddle, first what needs to happen is it needs to disconnect from that one so that it can connect to that one. And sometimes I wonder if this problem with connection is because there's other things we're connected to that we need to disconnect from. And I don't know what that's been for you as we've gone through COVID. I don't know what that is for you now. We can just slip into habits of being Christians and kind of merrily doing the Christian thing. But actually, what are the things that we need to disconnect from in order to connect deeply with God? And I think this is a prophetic word for us as a church right now. As we move into recovery, there are such opportunities to bring the good news of Jesus. People are hungry to hear it. But you know, if we don't disconnect, if we don't make sure we're connected, there's absolutely no point me doing a vision and values series, because we'll get 2 months down the line and we'll run out of steam. This isn't about St. Swithin's doing good things and nice things and planting. All that's great. This is about a connection and connecting people with the very presence of God, because he wants to fill them with the finest of wheat and satisfy them with the greatest of honey. And so as we start our vision and values series, that's really the invitation. How are you connecting with God? What are the things that you need to disconnect from in order to connect with God, with one another in the church, and with this city? Psalm 82 goes on to say, defend the cause of the weak and the fatherless, maintain the rights of the poor and oppressed, rescue the weak and needy. That is what it means to bring the kingdom. I don't think it's any coincidence that comes after the chapter we've just read. If we're going to connect with our city and bring the kingdom, first we need to make sure we're disconnected from the things that would hold us back and connected to the very heart and life and abundance of God. So can we stand together?